Hello everyone, John the Morgile here, checking in for a new Flat Earth video for you. Hope you do enjoy it. In this video we're going to review some of the basics about the static plane Earth and common illogical rebuttals that we can expect to receive from the majority of people who have never really critically or skeptically considered the standard model, the very model of the universe they will swear by. This isn't to say most people don't understand the standard model, rather that they haven't questioned its tenets. We're taught to take the standard model at face value, failing to revisit this topic with any degree of disbelief or critical skepticism. The concept of infinite space was so glamorized and romanticized by Hollywood and NASA in order to achieve a very specific end. They, whoever they are, utilized the booming, then brand new, network of in-home television sets to manipulate masses of people completely undetected. By creating psychological bonds between fictional characters in shows like Star Trek and movies like Star Wars, people are far more emotionally invested in the concept of space. With infinite space at the core of so many popular entertainment franchises, it's really no wonder that we have a culture so deeply espoused to fake space. And let's face it, people are less prone to question the precepts of infinite space and all that goes with it when they have a secret crush on Princess Leia, who lived in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago. The truth is, the idea of quote-unquote other galaxies wasn't even postulated until the late 1920s by Edwin Hubble of telescope fame. He theorized that the spiral objects seen in the night sky were actually other galaxies flying through space at breakneck speeds. The so-called scientific community wholeheartedly jumped on the bandwagon and began preaching other galaxies as scientific fact. The modern blind loyalism to such abstract theories is a direct result of the manner in which our education is handled anymore, memorizing curriculum and recalling quote-unquote the truth for the test later on. By teaching children what to think, as opposed to how to think, our educational system is a snare for their mind, and it trains them to operate as modern slaves. Slaves to a system which uses psychological tactics instead of physical chains. Psychological tactics so subtle and deeply seated that most people simply will never know they exist, nor would they even care to admit the staggering effects they have on our day-to-day choices and our behavioral patterns. The state is seen as a sort of quasi-parental unit or supreme authority in the minds of the youth and even many parents. So the school or the state is perceived as the primary authority on what is true and what is correct. The federally chartered school is seen as superior to the student's actual family unit, which is a big change that we've witnessed over the last few decades. So instead of looking within the family for authority on what is true or correct, ball Earth or what is morally acceptable for that matter, all of the so-called crews are trained of the spinning ball Earth theory are circumstantial at best and are not exclusive to the ball Earth theory. For example, the fact that you can see further from higher is often touted as proof of the Earth's rotundity. Such flimsy arguments are only sufficient to convince gullible toddlers, no offense to the gullible toddlers who might be out there watching right now, but this deception is sufficient to convince them that they live stuck to the side of a spinning ball. The deception is heavily reliant upon the fact that nobody ever goes back as an adult to the basic premises and actually question these tenets involved with the ball Earth theory. Until the last few years, that is. Now that the rational adults of the world have done the unthinkable and actually questioned the pillars of conventional wisdom and skeptically analyzed certain things which we were led to believe as children. Lo and behold, we have been completely flabbergasted to learn that, indeed, one of the biggest deceptions we were all faced with our whole lives is something as unlikely as the spinning ball Earth. In all honesty, when I first started researching this topic, it was very much tongue in cheek, and I set out to easily debunk the claims made by flat Earth proponents. For from the vantage point of someone still operating from within the standard paradigm, such a thing is incompatible with the subjective world. Needless to say, I was in for a shock when, one after another, the foundational arguments for the ball fell apart under rational, skeptical, honest discernment. What's so ironic is that you will be vilified and ostracized from the mainstream community for simply questioning the tenets of the mainstream, which is indeed the essence of the scientific method in the first place. Healthy, skeptical investigation with the truth as the ultimate goal, with a callous indifference to the beliefs or druthers of the practitioner. That's what makes the scientific method so effective. It attempts to insulate the subject matter from the whims or any dogmatic belief system of the scientist in question. When you remove such insulation and allow, for example, the creative liberties of abstract thinkers to run amok in the field of theoretical astrophysics, the purity of the endeavor is tarnished, and we leave ourselves open to fundamental misunderstandings or miscalculations of our natural place in the world. What is called science is closer akin to creative writing or even abstract art than it is to anything resembling science or physics specifically. Thankfully, indeed, we are living in the age of revelation, where the Most High has promised to dissolve all deceptions by bringing forth the light of truth into the places of darkness and deception. This light, I believe, is the steadfast spirit of proving all things to oneself, as opposed to blindly following the conventional wisdom or the conclusions arrived at by others, experts or not. The astrological age of Aquarius was kicked off by the advent of flat earth cavaliers coming forward as proponents for a position that is bound to ruin our public reputation, personal relationships, and even family ties. Unfortunately, the concept of infinite space has been deeply ingrained into our culture, and thus the very subconscious minds of many people, including our friends and family. It is an extremely painful decision to make, that is, to either keep your mouth shut about something which you know to be right, just to avoid stirring up wake, or to stand up and fight for an unpopular position because it is true and correct, often damaging personal and family relationships. Without speculating with regards to a motive, there is a grand deception at play here, to be sure. For whatever reason, the secretive cabal which controls the levers of power in this world have found it to behoove them to mislead the entire population regarding the very ground which we all walk upon. There are several potential motives which could be pointed to, but we can prove that the deception indeed exists with or without understanding the motive behind it. For some reason, the hidden hand has deemed it necessary to cover up the signature of the Creator, whose handiwork is revealed by close study of the world and the heavenly luminaries. By confusing us all about the nature of the stars and the world itself, they have effectively hidden our true origins and thus our true purpose in this life. Anyone with a rational mind can observe and measure the world's physical properties. Once one transcends the heliocentric programming which we were all subjected to, and simply review the assumptions inherent in the ball earth theory, it falls apart like a house of cards. So although the static planar nature of the world is indeed very obvious, it only becomes obvious when the psychological filter through which we view the world is disabled. That is why they hit us with the ball earth indoctrination at such a young age. The plain and simple, obvious truth about the world demands that our minds be programmed to ignore, mock, and even guard ourselves against the truth at as young an age as possible. Children are easily convinced of the wholly illogical mythos surrounding Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, for example, while it would be difficult, if not impossible, to convince a full-grown, rational adult of such fairy tales. Similarly, it would be a challenge to convince a reasonable adult that the world is a spinning sphere once they have emerged from the formative years of adolescence, free of ball earth programming. Our senses, and really common sense, tell us with no degree of uncertainty that the world is at rest. This is not just some claim of mine, it is the objective, verifiable truth which anyone can confirm. The world is at rest, and it presents itself to us as such. Even the most staunch supporter of the globe Earth theory will readily agree that the world is a perfectly fixed frame of reference. Were the world actually rotating and orbiting along multiple curved paths at unimaginable velocities, there would be an abundance of physical acceleration one could measure and point to as proof of such concepts as axial rotation, orbital motion, and of course the galactic frame of reference, just to name a few. Of course, not one single person in the history of the world has documented or measured geological acceleration, evidence of the reality that the world is perfectly and permanently at rest. This is a problem for the ball Earth theory, as the world is supposedly traveling along several varying orbital paths, quite a far cry from a fixed frame of reference. If the world was actually rotating towards the east at around 1,000 miles an hour, as claimed by the conventional wisdom, we should expect to see a major variance in airline flights traveling east to west versus west to east. When an airliner takes off from New York heading towards Los Angeles, it should be traveling west towards a destination which is traveling east towards the plane as well. This means westbound flights should be much shorter in duration compared to eastbound flights, as the Earth's rotation would be doing at least half of the work for the westbound plane, yet it would be racing against the eastbound plane, basically doubling the distance it would need to travel through the air to reach the destination. We should routinely experience westbound flights which are a tiny fraction of the duration to a similar eastbound flight. Such evidence would be extremely important to the ball Earth theory. Unfortunately, the duration of airline flights is forced to operate within the boundaries of reality, unlike the imaginings of the ball Earth proponents. Globbers take the fact that such flight durations are typically similar and rearrange reality to align with their theory, as opposed to modifying their theory to match reality. Quite the opposite of science, of course. Think about it this way. If you're standing in the end zone of a football field, ask a friend or an enemy to stand in the opposite end zone, and then the two of you begin walking towards one another. You would expect to meet up at somewhere around the 50-yard line. In this example, you would represent a westbound plane, and your acquaintance would represent your destination. On the other hand, a plane taking off from Los Angeles heading towards New York would be racing against the destination, meaning that the plane would have to work twice as hard in order to keep up with New York heading east at some 800 miles an hour, allegedly. So if you and your acquaintance in the football field begin walking in the same direction, say you walk towards their end zone and they about face and begin walking away from your end zone, you certainly would not expect to meet up at the 50-yard line. If you did meet up at the 50-yard line, you would know that they weren't doing their end of the demonstration properly. The simple fact is, we know for certain that the world is at rest because of the fact that eastbound flights are often similar, sometimes practically identical in terms of duration, to their westward counter flights. There should never be any set of conditions which would allow for this, assuming the supersonic axial rotation inherent in the ball Earth theory. Furthermore, in order to catch up with your friend that's walking in the same direction as you, you would actually never catch up with them unless you went faster than them. So it's going to be more difficult and more work involved to catch up with somebody that's traveling in the same direction as you. Whereas on the other hand, if someone is walking towards you and you're walking towards them, you're going to meet up in the middle, of course. So it's just basic common sense, obvious run-of-the-mill stuff, immutable laws of reality that must be completely overlooked in order to continue cottoning to the globe Earth theory. Now, instead of realizing the staggering implications of this data and abandoning the ball Earth theory, apologetic excuses and emotional responses are typically exhibited by the globber, experiencing what is known as cognitive dissonance. Since there's no possible way to account for the similarity in flight durations, it is instead claimed by the globber that such things are in fact normal and should be expected upon a world in perpetual supersonic eastward motion. This is ridiculous, yet they will proclaim that since the airplanes are moving along with a frame of reference with the ground prior to takeoff, the planes will thus remain in lockstep with that given frame of reference for the duration of the flight, especially due to the atmosphere being fixed to the geological reference frame. While such apologetics may be sufficient for those who are already convinced of the standard model, it is only sufficient because they fail to apply basic, immutable physical laws to the globe Earth theory. They will say that such flight durations are expected on a spinning ball, yet they will never test this claim, never check it against reality. The arguments against this point fail to address the very crux of the problem with the standard theory. The problem is that objects traveling towards one another will always have a higher relative speed compared to similar objects racing against one another, regardless of the frame of reference prior to takeoff. For them to claim that airplanes remain fixed to the velocity of the surface of the Earth by way of the atmosphere proves that they have not thought this through and are incapable of simply considering the world as anything but a spinning ball, even just for argument's sake. Immutable laws of physical reality demand that, were the Earth rotating towards the east, the flight from LA to New York should be a very short flight indeed, even though we have an atmosphere. Assuming the plane is fixed to the Earth's frame of reference prior to takeoff is fine. The same can also apply to the eastbound flight for this argument, although it's not 100% accurate to do so. The reason for this is the fact that, while an eastbound flight would hypothetically be synchronized to the Earth's reference frame before taking off, once the plane leaves the runway and begins heading east, it would absolutely not remain fixed to that reference frame indefinitely. And in terms of the westbound flight, once the jet engines begin propelling the plane west, the opposite direction as the spin, any eastward velocity which was merely lent to the plane by the Earth prior to takeoff would quickly be stripped away, and the ground speed of the plane would entail both the plane's westward air velocity plus the destination's eastward velocity combined, much like the demonstration on the football field described a few minutes ago, where you and your friend are walking towards one another and meeting up at the 50-yard line. To say that the eastbound flight and the westbound flight should be similar in duration would be akin to saying that you and your friend should meet up at the 50-yard line even if you're walking in the same direction. So it's just completely absurd to claim as such. The eastbound flight leaving LA heading towards New York would need to race against the destination and would simply not enjoy the luxury of the non-existing Earth spin doing over half of its work for it. The fact that these two flight durations are often identical, but always similar in duration, is irrefutable proof against the ball Earth theory. Such flight durations indeed debunk the ball Earth theory completely and finally. Were the Earth indeed rotating as claimed, there would be obvious, measurable differences in flight duration depending on the direction of travel. Westbound flights should enjoy their destination doing half of the work for them, while eastbound flights should be much more difficult to accomplish as they are literally racing against the destination, according to the ball Earth theory. And for argument's sake, we'll say that eastbound flights maintain or retain the eastward velocity lent to it by the Earth. They certainly do not have that luxury of the destination racing towards the nose of the plane. Frankly, one of the most important aspects of aviation should, according to the ball Earth theory, should involve calculating the rate of rotation of the world at departure point and destination point, which should be a major variable depending on the latitude of each point. For a point near the equator, the world should be rotating at around 1,000 miles an hour east, while a point on or near the pole should be essentially at rest, spinning about a half the speed as the hour hand on a 12-hour clock, discernibly not spinning at all. Similar arguments are made using snipers who are said to calculate the Coriolis effect into their long shots. This is quite deceptive, as it really is only half true. So it's true-ish, but it's still a lie. The fact of the matter is, no sniper or artillery gunner has ever considered the spin of the Earth when taking a shot. The Coriolis effect used in their calculations is dealing with the rifled projectile as the rotating object, not the Earth. If you actually study the degree of adjustments made by snipers, factoring in the Coriolis force, it is uniform regardless of the direction of the shot being fired. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, the Coriolis effect will affect your shot to the exact same degree whether you're firing north, south, east, or west. That's right, the amount of correction to a trajectory due to the Coriolis force is unaffected by the direction of the shot, proving conclusively that we're not dealing with Earth spin. The only time this could make any degree of sense would be if you were standing directly at the North Pole, in which case any direction you fired would be south, but the Coriolis effect would affect the bullet in the same way regardless of the direction fired. According to snipers' handbooks for the Army and for the Marines, the Coriolis effect will cause a bullet to veer slightly to the right in the northern hemisphere and slightly to the left in the southern, regardless of the direction of the shot as stated. This makes no sense according to the ball-earth theory, which should exhibit a gradient of the amount of shot diversion depending on the direction of the shot, if it were in fact the Earth's spin affecting the shot. Shots fired due north or due south should experience maximum divergence due to the Coriolis effect, while shots fired due east or due west should experience zero divergence due to the Coriolis effect. The truth is, there's no difference in shots fired north or east in terms of divergence caused by the Coriolis effect. Artillery operations also need not factor in the Earth's spin when prepping artillery fire, quite simply because the Earth is at rest. The truth is, any experiment, demonstration, or measurement conducted in order to discern the world's velocity returns results which are completely incompatible with the standard model. Back in the late 1800s, mathematician and astronomer George Biddle-Airy set out to measure the Earth's velocity through space by observing stellar aberration in a variety of controlled settings. Stellar aberration is best explained using an analogy. So if you're standing in the rain, which is falling straight down, your umbrella will be most effective if held upright above your head, 90 degrees. Now, if you're jogging through the same rain, you'd want to tilt your umbrella slightly forward, as the rain will apparently fall at an angle according to your reference frame. Finally, if you pick up the pace to a full sprint, your umbrella would be most effective by drastically tilting it forward to account for the aberration of the rain. Stellar aberration is very similar, where the light from the stars is represented by the rain, and the observer on Earth is represented by the person holding the umbrella. The umbrella would be like your telescope. So George Airy noticed that in order to get adequate stellar exposure using a telescope, it's necessary to tilt the telescope a few degrees, possibly due to the Earth's motion through space, or it could be possibly due to the motion of the medium through which the starlight must travel to reach your eye, a medium known as the ether. Without getting into the weeds describing the nuts and bolts of Airy's experiment, suffice to say that George Airy was reluctant to share the results of his experiment, which was to say that the data showed it was the Earth which was at rest, while the ether, or the physical media carrying the light waves, was in fact in motion above the stationary Earth. Instead of implementing Airy's staggering data points into the modern paradigm, scientism fought back against the data and introduced Albert Einstein onto the world stage. Instead of scientifically or responsibly dealing with this huge problem for the ball, Einstein's theory on relativity essentially does away with the ether altogether, mathematically and hypothetically solving this problem which HTRAE had apparently stumbled onto with his so-called failed experiment. And I would say there is no such thing as a failed experiment so long as the data be true. Unfortunately, when it comes to actually solving the problem in reality, that's a horse of a different color. Einstein's imagination is somehow exempt from the rules and standards which apply to everyone else in the scientific community. For some reason, Einstein was granted the status of perpetually correct and exempt from logical checks and balances inherent in the scientific method. I'll put a card here for a recent video I did concerning Einstein. At any rate, Einstein and his untestable, unverifiable theories were instantly and permanently set in proverbial stone. Since presenting his theories of relativity to the world, so-called scientists have been obsessed with Einstein's fantastical theories and proving him right. It seems, however, that nobody in the scientific community is at all interested in proving him wrong, which is what responsible scientists actually ought to be doing. Except when, of course, it comes to anything underscore Einstein. But take a look at my recent video highlighting Einstein's lackluster career for some jaw-dropping and really quite hilarious information about Einstein's career in the inventing arena. I'll try and remember to put a card to that video right here and link it up at the end of the video here. I suppose that once we realize the world in which we live is altogether unique and of sublime importance in the grand scheme of things, it puts us in a completely different frame of reference compared to the mainstream paradigm. That dictates the world as being essentially unimportant, just one of billions of spheroidal planets in the so-called galaxy alone, zipping around infinite space with no real destination, no real origin point, no real intelligence guiding anything. Instead, the blind and aloof forces of chance and chaos rule infinite space, where Earth is of no real importance in the grand scheme of things. When we test the ball-Earth theory against measurable reality, however, the ball-Earth theory fails and falls short on every front. The expected curvature of 8 inches per mile square cannot be found anywhere by anyone, and not for lack of trying. Whenever we measure for the necessary curvature to result in an overall spherical world, we find no such curvature exists. Whenever we measure for rotational motion or orbital motion, angular acceleration that is, no such acceleration exists. There is literally no evidence to prove the world as being a rotating sphere, because a rotating sphere it is not. The world is at rest and therefore is a fixed frame of reference, without any mystery as to how that is possible. According to the ball-Earth theory, there is absolutely no reason we shouldn't be able to find evidence for geological acceleration or motion. As the world is allegedly rotating and orbiting the sun, we should find ample physical evidence to support this claim. No such evidence will ever be found because, again, the world is actually at rest. All ancient cultures were well aware of this truth, and they were able to accomplish feats of architecture and engineering deemed quote-unquote impossible by even today's technological standards. So how is it possible that the cultures who believed the Earth was a motionless plane could accomplish such astonishing structures like the Great Pyramids in Giza in South America and China and really all over the world, the mountaintop temple complex at Machu Picchu, the towering palaces of India, or the extremely large and complex canal systems and temples at Angkor Wat in Cambodia? If they were technologically capable of such things, we should never dare call them simple, gullible, or misinformed, since they were capable of feats which we cannot match or even understand fully today. We should be careful not to underestimate their intelligence or understanding of the world and of the heavens. So that about wraps this one up, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Without getting into too much details, I know everybody's having a tough time with the coronavirus situation, the world being on lockdown. It's very strange times indeed. I would like to quickly thank all of the channel supporters, those of you out there who have helped monetarily as well as with your prayers. Your support really does mean a lot to me and my family. God bless you guys, and really thanks so much for your help. I'll just have you know that it's been very difficult for myself and for my family. We've had a rough go of it. So if you would like to help us continue putting out videos and continue surviving in this crazy world, please consider becoming a channel supporter through PayPal, Patreon, Venmo, or Cash App. I'll put links in the description, but usually it's the Morgile is the keyword for those. So paypal.me/themorgile, etc., etc. So, anyways, thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. Really appreciate your time here. God bless you. And as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody. See you in the next video.